The wind whispered through the barren moors, as if echoing the silence of Greystone Hall, a centuries-old estate veiled in mist and memories. Eleanor Whitmore stood by the frostbitten window, her presence as quiet as the dust that lingered on the antique frames. The world had always looked through her, third daughter of a bankrupt baron, pale, bookish, and tragically unremarkable. In a family that prized beauty and connections, Eleanor was a forgotten verse in a grand poem no one cared to finish. Her mother spoke often of matches and gowns, never noticing the girl who read by candlelight when others danced. Life had taught her to lower her voice, to step aside, to disappear. But deep within, her heart burned with questions no one dared ask. The house itself was her only true companion, with creaking floors that groaned secrets of generations past. Greystone was a place where joy had long fled, a place of portraits with downcast eyes and corridors that never ended. Eleanor wandered them like a ghost in her own life, too clever to be desired, too quiet to be heard. Yet she dreamed not of balls or silk, but of being seen, of being chosen without negotiation or shame. Her sisters mocked such notions, calling her naive. But Eleanor held to her dreams like pressed flowers in a book, faded, fragile, but real. And sometimes, in the hush of twilight, she believed the house listened back. It was in this quiet ruin, among ivy-covered stones and lonely staircases, that fate would begin to stir. A letter would arrive, sealed in red wax, bearing a name she had never spoken but would soon be bound to. Not by choice, not by love, but by a vow someone else made for her. And so her story begins. Not with a kiss, but with a silence that would soon be broken. The day he arrived, the sky wore a heavy grey, as though mourning something unnamed. Eleanor watched from the upper gallery as the carriage wheels sank into the muddy drive, splashing the cold against stone. The man who stepped out was tall, cloaked in black, his face stern beneath the brim of a rain-dark hat. Lord Nathaniel Blackthorne, a name whispered in county gossip, known for war scars and a heart no woman had ever softened. He did not glance up. He did not need to. His presence struck the hall like thunder in a chapel. Eleanor's breath caught, not from attraction, but from the unspoken knowledge that her life was about to fracture. Their introduction was formal, brittle as porcelain. He bowed stiffly. She curtsied with eyes lowered, trained by years of invisibility. When their gazes finally met, something sharp passed between them, not warmth, but recognition of two lonely souls, armed with silence. "You are not what I expected," he said without kindness, studying her as one might a ledger entry. "Nor are you," she replied, her voice trembling yet unyielding. That was the first crack in the quiet. He turned away without another word, his boots echoing like a verdict across the marble floor. She remained still, her heart beating like wings trapped in a jar. At dinner, he did not speak, nor did she. But in that aching stillness, their presences wrestled, unspoken truths scratching at the walls of civility. Eleanor felt both anger and curiosity twisting within her. Who was this man who judged with his eyes yet revealed nothing of his own heart? And why, of all women, had she been chosen as the thread to stitch his life into respectability? She did not know then that hate and love were often born from the same wound, and that this stranger would soon become both her trial and her salvation. The wedding came with no music, no laughter, and no lace-draped joy. It was held in the crumbling chapel behind Greystone Hall, where ivy crept through the stained glass and pews groaned beneath forgotten prayers. Eleanor wore her mother's gown, yellowed by time, while Nathaniel stood in somber stillness, his jaw clenched as if bracing for war. No guests, no flowers, only a priest with a fading voice and the cold breath of autumn on their necks. Vows were exchanged like signatures on a contract, eyes never fully meeting. "For duty," he murmured beneath his breath. She did not answer. Her hands trembled as he placed the ring, heavy, too large, as though it belonged to someone else. The days that followed were filled with silence that bruised. Nathaniel retired to the west wing, his door always locked, his past sealed within. Eleanor wandered the halls as she always had, only now she was no longer a daughter, but a wife. In name, not in truth. The staff, old and watchful, avoided eye contact, as if sensing the ghost of affection that refused to rise. He left early, returned late, and spoke little. Yet she caught him watching her once, his expression unreadable, a flicker of something buried. She dared not hope. Hope, she had learned, was a dangerous thing when no one offered you kindness to cling to. But even cold marriages have heat hidden in the cracks. Their first real argument erupted over a trivial matter, a broken clock she had moved. His voice was sharp, hers louder still, surprised by her own courage. "If I must be your wife, I will not be your shadow," she cried. For a moment, the air between them trembled. He said nothing, only stared, then walked away. But something had shifted. In that fight, she had taken a piece of herself back, and unknowingly begun to claim a corner of his heart. It began with small things, so small Eleanor almost missed them. A shawl folded neatly by the library door after she forgot it. Fresh roses, white, her favourite, placed quietly in the drawing room where no guests ever came. He never claimed these gestures, and she never asked, but they lingered between them like unspoken questions, warming the cold stone of Greystone with a flicker of something soft. One morning, she found her favourite novel, the one with worn pages, on the armrest of her chair, tucked inside a pressed violet. Her heart stumbled. He had been watching more than she realized. Nathaniel, too, seemed different. Not warmer, but less guarded. He no longer flinched when she entered a room. Once, by the fireplace, she dared to speak of her childhood dreams. He listened, eyes half-shadowed, lips still, but when she fell silent, he whispered, "You should not have had to let go of them." It was the first time his voice held tenderness. Their dinners, though quiet, grew less tense. She noticed the way his hand paused above hers, almost touching, and the way his gaze lingered when she laughed, not loud, but freely. It was not love, not yet. But it was the start of being seen. Still, there were walls he would not lower, doors he would not open, especially the one at the end of the west wing. Once she asked what lay behind it. He only replied, "What should have been buried?" Yet even that answer was different. It held pain, not dismissal. One stormy evening, lightning struck close, and the sound jolted Eleanor from sleep. She ran into the hall and found him there, already looking for her. Neither spoke, but he reached for her hand and didn't let go until the thunder had passed. The fever came with winter, swift and merciless, creeping through the servants' quarters and up the grand staircase like a silent thief. Eleanor fell ill first, trembling, burning. Her breath, shallow as snow, began to blanket the moors. Nathaniel had left for London, and when word reached him, he returned within hours, mud on his cloak, fury in his eyes. She drifted in and out of sleep, unaware of the hands that soaked her brow, the voice that called her name again and again. "Stay," he whispered in the dark, voice cracked. "Don't vanish like the rest." For 3 nights he never left her side. He read aloud from her books, brought warm broth to lips that barely moved, and slept in a chair that seemed to age him by years. When she finally woke, weak, dazed, he was there, head resting near her hand. "You came back," she murmured. His eyes, red-rimmed but dry, met hers. "Of course I did. That was all. No confessions, no poetry. But the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of what they dared not name. And in that fragile quiet, something bloomed. Eleanor's recovery was slow, and during those days she saw a different Nathaniel, one who brought her favorite tea before she could ask, who let her lean on his arm without flinching. He showed her the greenhouse behind the manor, long abandoned, and promised they'd fill it with life again. When she laughed at the thought, he only smiled. "You've already brought breath to this place," he said. She wanted to reply, to reach for him, but fear still gripped her ribs. Love, she was learning, was not born of grand gestures, but of being chosen in the quietest hour. Spring crept into Greystone quietly, melting frost and drawing life from stone. Eleanor walked the gardens each morning, her strength returning with the soft bloom of violets. One afternoon she found Nathaniel by the fountain, lost in thought, staring at the cracked lion's head that no longer poured water. "This place is broken," he murmured, not noticing her approach. "Like me." She stood beside him without a word. He looked at her then, really looked, and something long buried rose to the surface. "I lost someone here," he said. "Before the war, before you." She listened, heart open, as he spoke of a brother lost to tragedy, a promise unkept and the weight of guilt that had silenced his soul. "I thought if I buried enough I'd stop feeling," he confessed, eyes cast down. "But then you walked through this house like light through dust, and I remembered what pain felt like and how much I missed it." Eleanor reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. "You don't have to carry it alone," she whispered. "You never did." In that moment, the silence that once divided them became sanctuary. That night, they did not kiss. They did not touch. But he sat beside her by the fire until the last embers fell, and when she leaned her head on his shoulder, he let her stay. Days turned to weeks, and the rhythm between them changed. Shared smiles over breakfast, walks beneath blossoming trees, the tender brushing of fingers as they passed. Eleanor no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, cherished, not for beauty or lineage, but for the very soul she had once hidden. And in Nathaniel's quiet devotion, love began to take root, slow, steady, and deeply real. It was Eleanor's first public appearance as Lady Blackthorne, a spring ball in London, hosted by the Countess of Weybridge, a woman known for her sharp tongue and colder heart. Dressed in sapphire silk, Eleanor descended the grand staircase on Nathaniel's arm, her heart pounding beneath the weight of 100 scrutinizing eyes. Whispers bloomed like poison in the corners of the ballroom. Is that her? The quiet girl from the country? A baron's forgotten daughter turned wife? Eleanor held her head high, but each step felt heavier, each glance a dagger cloaked in perfume. The cruelty came not in violence, but in elegance. A toast was raised in Nathaniel's honor, and the Countess turned her gaze to Eleanor. And how charming that Lord Blackthorne's bride finds comfort in the simplicity of the countryside. One can only hope she'll learn the refinements of society in time. Laughter followed, quiet, mocking, deliberate. Eleanor's cheeks burned, but Nathaniel said nothing. His silence, heavier than any insult, cut deeper than words. She looked at him, but he stared at his glass. In that moment she felt stripped, not just of dignity, but of the fragile trust they had built. She fled the ballroom, breath shallow, vision blurred. Behind her, chandeliers sparkled like indifferent stars. In the carriage, he finally spoke. "It wasn't worth a scene," he muttered. "They're vultures." Eleanor turned to him, voice trembling. "You were supposed to be my shield." He flinched, the truth striking harder than accusation. That night, she slept in her old chamber at Greystone, the space between them colder than ever. Love, she realized, was not just presence. It was defense. And without it, she was alone again, even in the arms of the man she had begun to love. 2 weeks passed in aching silence. Eleanor returned to Greystone's library, finding refuge among forgotten words. Nathaniel remained distant, buried in affairs and regrets he dared not name. But the wound of that night in London festered, and guilt pressed on him like armor rusting from within. Then came the letter, another invitation, this time to a council meeting where Eleanor's presence was requested to satisfy noble curiosity. She intended to decline, but he stopped her. "You will go," he said, voice low, "and they will see you, not as my wife, as you." That day the chamber was filled with the same eyes, the same sharpened smiles. Eleanor walked in alone, chin high, dressed not in grandeur but in dignity. As murmurs began, Nathaniel stepped forward from the back, not announced, not summoned, and placed himself at her side. "Before a single word is spoken," he said, voice clear and thunderous, "know this, I chose her, and I would choose her again. She carries more grace in silence than most of you in splendor." The room fell into stunned quiet. Eleanor turned toward him, tears gathering not from pain, but from being defended truly for the first time. From that moment something shifted, not only between them, but within her. She began to walk taller, to speak without apology. She restored the greenhouse as promised, filling it with color and warmth, her fingers in the soil, her heart steady. And Nathaniel, he was always there, not leading, not overshadowing, but with her. One evening, beneath the flowering vines, he took her face in his hands and whispered, "You make me more than I ever was." She smiled, touching his chest, "And you made me seen." In that space, love was no longer a question. It was truth. Years later, Greystone Hall was no longer the house of shadows it once was. Laughter echoed through the high ceilings, soft and bright, the laughter of children, of life reborn. Eleanor sat by the greenhouse steps, her daughter curled against her lap, petals in her tiny fists. Nathaniel stood nearby, helping their son replant the roses that once wilted in silence. The land, once grey and grieving, now pulsed with colour, every corner touched by care. They had rebuilt not just the house, but themselves. What was broken had not been hidden. It had been mended together. Letters from distant nobles still arrived, seeking favour or commentary. Eleanor answered when she wished, but never out of duty. She had become a voice in her own right, consulted, respected, admired not for titles, but for grace under fire. Women wrote to her asking how one survives a loveless start. Her reply was always the same: "You are not what they see, you are what you believe." And in the stillness of twilight, Nathaniel would sit beside her, fingers laced with hers, whispering of dreams they once feared to speak aloud. Love, she had learned, is not found. It is grown, watered by time, rooted in truth. They built a school near the edge of the estate for girls like she once was, invisible, bookish, full of silent fire. It bore her name, though she never asked, and on its gates, carved into the stone, were the words Nathaniel had once said in the greenhouse: "You brought breath to this place." Their children would carry both legacy and light, and as Greystone glowed beneath the setting sun, Eleanor knew her story had not ended in vows spoken by others. It had only begun. Years had passed, but the wind through Greystone's halls still carried the same song, now gentler, less haunted. Eleanor walked the grounds alone one morning, her hands brushing wildflowers that had once struggled to grow. She stopped beneath the old willow, the one she had sat under as a girl when no one called her name. Now children's voices echoed from the school nearby, laughter painting the air with colour. She closed her eyes, remembering the woman she had once been, silent, hidden, afraid to hope. And she whispered a quiet promise to the wind: "Never again." She returned to the house, where the fire crackled and her husband waited with a book in hand, eyes warm, silver threading his hair. Their love had not burned bright and reckless. It had endured, steady as stone, soft as morning mist. There had been pain and loss and years that tested them, but through it all they had chosen each other, again and again. Not because they had to, but because they could. That was the vow that mattered, the one not forced, not arranged, but whispered in quiet moments long after the ceremony had ended. Love, after all, was not a single day. It was 1,000 silent choices. And as Eleanor looked out the window at the life they had built, imperfect, beautiful, entirely theirs, she knew she had not been saved by a man or a title or a vow made in a chapel. She had saved herself by refusing to remain unseen. The girl in the shadow had become a woman who lit every room she entered, and the vow she once feared had led her not into chains, but into freedom. A love story, yes, but more than that. A story of becoming, of blooming, of being at last fully known.